Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be the third update on the Dark Sun campaign. I missed something last video. The last video I ended without mentioning that there was a combat at the end. So we'll start with that and roll into what happened on the third game session. So at the end of the second game session, we flipped into the we sped the time up and started the, celebrations at the temple. Well, the middle of those celebrations get attacked by orcs. One of the players that didn't show up the first week showed up the second week and made a character, and he was playing a giant barbarian thing. So we divide up and try to start handling the orcs. And these were the orcs we didn't deal with in the fall, so we weren't thinking about it, and it is funny how it comes to bite us in the butt. Our party divides up and starts fighting them. My scion, Oya, is doing terrible in combat. Dreamers are not meant for combat, and this is when I learned that, so I am going to have to relegate her to the back of the party as much as possible until I can get her a couple levels and a very potent psionic spell. But until then, she's pretty much just an extra body to distract the enemy. But my O-Reed, Ort, he was able to waylay into the combat with his power attack and raging from his one level of barbarian, that he could deal out damage, and he had cleave, so if he could hit one target, he could hit a second target, hopefully, and drop targets faster, or at least their HP totals a lot faster. So he progressed it to do that. The giant, and this is where everyone in the party's like, what are you doing? Started picking up the NPCs and using them as weapons against the orc, killing each NPC in his attempt to kill an orc. He was probably about 2 rounds away from Ort taking him out with the sword. But that's because Ort lives in the town and he is pretty much sullying the name of the group by doing this. We get through the combat, and then that's when that game session ended. The next game session takes up, and the townfolk that ran into the forest to avoid the combat come back in, and then whatever guards that survived take the giant in for trial. And none of us stop him in any way. But one of the players wants to argue a way through the trial to get him to not be put to death. That player didn't show up for this game session. Now, the trial will be played out at some point in the future whenever that player can make a game session. This third session, we left one orc alive out of everything that fought us, and then the samurai, the walrus samurai, begins cutting off fingers and asking it questions, and it can't answer. Ort, I think it was Ort, or Hoya. One of them knows orc, so they came over and started translating, after the orc had already lost about 3 fingers. The orc loses his hand, refusing to answer some of the questions, and then by the time we're satisfied with the answers, the stuff we can get from him, the samurai chops off his other hand. We take the heads of the orcs that we had killed in combat and cash them in, and we pull out, I don't know which character did it, but we pull the spinal cords out, because this little bit of downtime I was half paying attention because I was trying to help somebody else create a character. So I'm missing bits and pieces myself, but the spinal cords we tied together and we wrapped them around the shoulders of this orc that had no hands. We healed him a little bit so he wouldn't bleed to death, and then we sent him off to give warning to his any of his tribe that's left. And then we give him a little bit of time, and then we follow. We track him all the way back to a fort. I think it took us a day and a half to get there. And the fort definitely did not look orc made. So this is something the townsfolk, we found out later, that the townsfolk had built and defended in this wilderness area for a long time. And then at some point they stopped either having contact or using it. The information I remember is vague on that. Either way, we see figures up top the wall. It's built up on a elevated position with a ramp that goes up to the door. The walls are about, I think, 20 feet high. And we see some people up on the wall. There is a volley of arrows that comes at us while we're just trying to sneak around and not be that obvious. And there's also a few catapults, or the equivalent, launching a bunch of boulders in the air, where it's more of an area effect instead of an individual projectile. And we took some damage from that. After that, we had our kobold. The midget kobold, he's wearing a turtle shell, so his disguise check's pretty high when he just walks around on all fours with that turtle shell on. He makes his way up to the walls, and he sets the walls on fire. While that's going on, the doors open and we see a giant. And I'd probably say it's an ogre, but the best description we got is it's a giant to start with. And it's definitely a dumb giant because of the way it was acting. So it picks up something and chucks it at us, and then we proceed into combat, rushing up into the fort. And then we find that there's an orc sitting on a throne with a book, and he's not very bulky like normal orcs. So we're assuming he's a mage. I don't remember who got over there, but somebody got over there and threatened him real good for the combat and just kept putting the hurting on him while we handled the giant. Ort was definitely in the combat with the giant. As soon as the giant was down and the orc mage was handled, we looked around and there was no orcs in this. So the crossbows up top the wall, the volleys of arrows we had, was on a weird pulley system. And then there was some magic being thrown at us from this mage, and then this ogre used the catapults and stuff. So we had learned a few things about these orcs, at least. They're definitely smarter than you'd expect. We find the orc that had the hands missing. We threaten him some more, and then we send him off to make sure that if there are any other orcs in the area, they know about us. Because how else are you supposed to increase your reputation? By not leaving survivors. You leave survivors. After that, we go back to town. We cash in the bounties, and then I think a week goes by, and the whole game session that game was this fort. So there's a lot of information about the combat that I'm leaving out. But after that, the next game session takes up with us taking our next job. And spoiler alert, our next job at the end of it sends us into Dark Sun. So that's where the real Dark Sun part begins.